My daughter and I had a little conversation yesterday, and she's been sick. We've got the plague has descended on the Koukl household. About a week ago today, I started getting a little raspy. I noticed it at the end of the show, and usually what happens, I get a little scratchy in the back of the throat. I get a little kind of steamy and hot on the face, and I can feel it coming. You know, the sinus thing starts happening, and then I got up in the morning and I could feel this. You know, you do the, what's an ungross way of saying it? Well, you clear things out, and it wasn't pretty. So I had this thing coming on. Now, this stuff happens to me once in a while, but it usually doesn't get past that stage. Unfortunately, it didn't for me. But on Wednesday afternoon, we had to go pick up my daughter from school, Annabeth. She had a sore throat, and that was pretty ugly, and headaches. We brought her back, and she finally went back to school today. I went out of town on Friday, came back on Saturday evening. My wife got the barfs. Where'd that come from? Right around noon, and she was up chucking all day. And then my daughter, Eva, the youngest, that hit her, and she's still at home. So we've been battling this thing, but because Annabeth's been under the weather and missed a few days of school, she had to do some work for me, and so that is some homework. Her teachers got in touch with me, and she had to do a little quiz, and her quiz was on a book that I highly recommend for students her age. That would be logic stage, roughly middle school, and this is a book that helps them to understand fallacies. It's called The Fallacy Detective. It's got like a cartoon dog on the front of it. There's another book by the same author that teaches critical thinking skills, and I think they're both good. So she had to do a teaching on, she had to read the chapter on red herrings, a red herring being something that is irrelevant to the point that you're discussing that drags you off the track. And then she had to do a little quiz on it. Well, she had a little cavalier attitude about studying for this quiz and did not do well on the online quiz. And I took a look at it. And so I made her read the chapter again, and I was going to give her my own quiz because I wanted her to get it. And she said, "Papa, I already took the quiz." Now, that's what I expect from a student, especially a fifth grader, because when you're students, you're thinking about getting the information for the test, and once the test is over, you can forget about it. But I didn't want my daughter to be thinking about education that way. I understand that, and a lot of us that's how we got through college. Just get it out of the way. Don't remember anything, but we got a degree. Paid a lot of money. Don't remember anything. We got a degree. And it strikes me that education is an end in itself, that it might be good to learn these things because they're just good to learn for life. This is especially true of critical thinking skills, and this is what I told her. I said, "Honey, I want you to learn about fallacies, not for a quiz, but for life. God has given us a capacity to reason, and He's given that for a reason. And the reason He gave us a capacity to reason is so that we can be protected from foolishness. Ideas matter. Truth matters. Reason is a tool to get to the truth. If you can't know the truth, you'll be dead in a day. We got to get some things right, not just for our physical health, but for our spiritual well-being. So when we learn, honey, about fallacies and about careful reasoning, we're trying to learn about these things for life, not for a quiz." And then it just occurred to me, and I'm trying to find a way to bring it even a little bit more down to earth. And part of my approach to parenting on these issues is to take what opportunities I can and leverage them into a little, lesson, a life lesson. And, when you start getting into these things, you've done it a couple times, the kids roll their eyes, okay, here was Pop again. But, I think this stuff is going to stick. Now, I don't think that I'm a clever dad. And this isn't false humility. Man, I'm stumbling through the whole process and doing the best I can and praying hard and hoping that some things I say will stick. But one thing that I've tried to do, and for many of you other unclever dads stumbling through the process, I add these things to the show because sometimes it might be a little encouragement, give you another tool that you can add to your arsenal. Just take it a moment to reason with her and tell her why reason's so important. And what illustration can I? Oh, I know what it is. Here I said, you know how, honey, we tell you to look both ways before you cross the street? Why do we do that? So I won't get run over. That's right. I'm teaching you about using your mind well, about reasoning well, about fallacies, which, by the way, she'll continue to learn because this is the teaching in the school that she goes to. She's in a whole period now called, not period, this stage of education, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade, basically, is called the logic stage. And they're trying to teach him how it all goes together and how to think well and how to recognize bad thinking and how to develop a good argument. And so this isn't just a quickie on red herrings, but it's part of their educational program. So she's going to get more and more and more of this. Thankfully, she's being taught how to think because thinking matters and truth matters. And you look both ways before you cross the street so you won't get run over. And in the same way, we learn about fallacies and how to think carefully so you don't get run over by a bad idea. Because bad ideas are just as lethal as automobiles. Sometimes even worse because they become eternally lethal, if you catch my drift. We need to learn these things, friends. Look, if you're an adult and you are not familiar with some basic fallacies, red herring, ad hominem or against the man fallacy, genetic fallacy, things like circular reasoning, appeal to emotion. All of these things are things that are used constantly in our daily life to persuade us to believe stupid things. And many of us fall for it because we haven't been taught to look both ways before we cross the street. We step out and get run over. Buy this book, The Fallacy Detective. You know, when you go to Amazon and you find it, you're going to see the other book that this same author has written about reasoning. Get them both. Read them. I'm going to guarantee you something, friends. If my 5th grader can read it and understand it, you can too. All right? It's within reach. But when you start understanding fallacies, you're going to see them popping up everywhere. Not because they weren't popping up before, but when they popped up, you didn't see them. J.P. Moreland had a great illustration when I first started taking classes from him. He said his point was the more you learn about something, the more you see. The more you learn about something, the more you see. You watch a football game, you don't know anything about football, you don't see much. Bunch of people running around, knocking each other down. You start to learn more about football, you see the line of scrimmage. You see tight ends and wide ends. You see quarterbacks. You see linebackers. You see certain formations. You see certain plays. You start to see strategies develop. And what happens? Then you can become a player of sorts. You be an armchair player, as it were, but you participate. Because learning these things allows you to see a whole much more. Boy, this is really necessary when it comes to critical thinking and worldviews. We want you to see these things. We want you to learn them and see them and be protected. Don't want you to be run over by a bad idea. All right, let's go take some calls here. Chris, welcome to the show. Hi.
Hey, Greg. Nice to talk to you.
Thank you. Nice to talk with you, too.
Hey, I just wanted to say as well, I came to Christ when I was 19 years old through the use of Apologetics. I am now in my third semester of college, and if it wasn't for the training I had in apologetics, I don't think my faith would have lasted.
Wow.
So I just want to say that if you're thinking of sending someone to rethink apologetics, it's definitely a good idea.
Wow. Good. Well said.
Yeah. But anyways, my question kind of segues off of that. Like I said, I'm in my third semester of college, and I'm taking a class on late Rome and medieval humanities. And we've been in the semester for about a month now, and we've spent all our time learning thus far basically how the professor believes that the Old is a bunch of nonsense. He argues that it was a...
Wait, you blanked out there for a minute. Cut out. Would you say Old Testament is a bunch of nonsense?
Yes, that's what we've been studying so far. His basic idea is that it was put together as a means of propaganda during the Babylonian exile to kind of control the people there. And the first paper I write for the class was on this idea. He gave us some biblical passages in the Old Testament, and the only sources we were allowed to use were the notes that we took during his lectures, and also a textbook.
Goodness gracious. Are you kidding me?
No, and also the textbooks, which he's actually the author of. And so given those presuppositions and the data that we are allowed to use, the only conclusion that we can really draw out of it is the conclusion that he's already argued in class. And the thesis that he gave us was, how has the Hebrew view of God in the Old Testament evolved? And basically the only conclusion is they began worshiping a volcano and then ended up changing a lot of it to use as a means of control for the Israelites in Babylon.
Kind of like the way his lectures and his testing is a means of controlling your own thinking, huh?
Yeah, very astute, yeah, basically.
Yeah.
But my question is but the essay I have is due tomorrow, and what I basically did is I did the assignment as he said, and then on the end of it, I did a page break, and I put a heading, said, this is not part of my essay, and I gave a response to what I had written. And looking ahead, after we leave the Old Testament, we move on to study Osiris and Horus and Mithras, and then we finally get to Jesus.
Yeah.
And it looks like we have to write another paper on Jesus, and I can kind of see where things are heading.
Yeah.
I was just looking for some general advice, not so much on how you deal with the arguments, but how you might deal with the class to maybe bring some light in the dark place that it is.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. This is. Well, if it's not pertaining to the content proper, but how you deal with the class. If you have a hostile professor that doesn't, basically it's my way or the highway, I'm not sure what you can do in the class proper. It might turn out that you can have conversations with students outside of class and point out that he's giving one side of the argument. This, by the way, is an informal fallacy called special pleading, where you give only the evidence that supports your view, and you disregard the evidence that goes against your view. So the way you've structured the question, I'm not sure what I could say to you. It does, what you can do with the class other than refute the ideas of the professor. That sounded like the way you asked it. Is that right?
Right. Well, let me ask this. I'm going to turn in my paper tomorrow, and I don't know how he's going to react to me basically responding to what I wrote, and it's kind of informally coming after the ideas he's presented. If he were to force me to play along with his ideas, do you think it would be smart to just drop the class altogether, or just kind of write papers on what I don't believe?
No. Well, there's a couple ways you can go here. I wouldn't necessarily drop the class. What you're getting in the class is you're getting a good education on how the other side thinks. And to go along with his assignment, that is, please regurgitate what I told you happened. Please revisit all of my own views. It just forces you then to get his views correctly. So this is an education for you that's valuable. You see how they think. You've been there, done that. You understand it, so you're not going to be taken by surprise, and you're not going to be misrepresenting their view. You got a professor who laid it all out. So there's a value in here for you taking the course. Now, if I were writing a paper doing the assignment that you just described, I think I would be a little bit annoyed. And I mean, just maybe annoyed enough to say, pepper my paper with statements like, well, according to the professor such and so, or according to the syllabus, and therefore I am clearly I am simply reciting what another person's point of view is, rather than look at what he's forcing you to do is he's forcing you to make his case. Here's the way it was, and here are the reasons. QED, end of issue. And you don't believe that. So you could just do it like, according to this is the way it worked. And there you have it. The gospel according to Professor whatever, there it is. And so you're not owning it. You're just fulfilling the requirement. That'd be a way of doing it. Now, I do have a thought about the addendum that you put on, and maybe in the addendum that you're adding is you're accomplishing that according to the professor kind of purpose. But you might want to send it under a separate cover. If you include it with your paper, he may use that then to reflect negatively on your paper. And he might be able to construe it by saying, well, this was part of his paper, and so I'm going to subtract based on these remarks, even though you did double space and you said off the record kind of thing. If you turned in your paper and then turned in something else a day later to him as a reflection on the assignment, then I think it's going to be much more difficult for him to mark your paper down for something you said a day later. So it's just something you want to think about, and I'm trying to protect you.
Right.
Make sense?
No, that definitely makes sense. Because I can just tell, looking at the syllabus, that there's going to be a lot of papers that I have to write that are going to be pertaining to this issue, and that makes a lot of sense to protect myself. That you can't kind of construe it as one long line of thought and kind of an incoherent idea, because the essay ends differently than it started.
Well, you may also, when you get to these others, Osiris, etc., be sure you're working with the primary source documentation. Okay, this is really important, and because it is easy to imagine parallels that don't exist. Have you seen the piece I wrote called "Recycle Redeemer"?
I may have. I've read a couple things on it. I can't remember if I read that one in particular.
I strongly urge you to get the article. It's called Recycle Redeemer by me. I don't know if it's on our website anymore. We've included it into a book of essays. So sometimes when we do that, we pull it off the website. But I have a suspicion that if you just troll around the internet with that search, you're going to find it somewhere. Recycle Redeemer by Greg Koukl. And in that, I talk about not only the factual problems of this thesis, but also the problems in reasoning, the rational mistakes that are being made with the claim that the myth of Jesus can be explained by parallel myths from an earlier time that are similar in a relevant way. And that if that's what you're going to be up against, it's good that you're prepared with this piece so that it will help you to ask the right questions in your discussions with the professor at class.
Right. No,
all right.
Definitely. Yeah. Every time I've noticed, whenever people speak up, he just kind of discounts what they're saying by calling it Sunday school and moving on. If anyone,
yes, that's an ad hominem.
Yeah.
That is a red herring, ad hominem. That is dismissal. That is ridicule.
You won't even entertain the ideas.
Well, wait. How about this? When he says, "Well, that's Sunday school," and you say, "Well, Professor, ridicule's not an argument," then see what he says. I mean, it may be daring for you, and you let the chips fall, but you don't have to be rude. Just say, "Wait a minute, Professor, ridicule's not an argument." What do you mean by that? Well, I brought up a legitimate point, and you ridiculed it as a Sunday school point, but you never answered it. So do you have an answer for it, or are you just going to ridicule it? The class would like to know.
Right.
So
I've I don't know, I'm trying to balance my academic career with wanting to kind of speak up for my faith, and I'm a little nervous if I do it. It may lead to
I
unforeseen
understand.
consequences.
I understand, and so you have to decide for yourself how you want to approach this. But notice that was a question that pertained to his claim. It is not a question that is advancing your faith.
Right.
Implicitly is meant to have an impact regarding your own convictions, but it is fully legitimate to raise a question and if he dismisses it by that's Sunday school, that's when it's fair, I think, to call him and say, well, Professor, that's not an answer. That's ridicule. Do you have an answer to the question or not? And that's not you advancing your faith. That is you asking for an answer to a question given to him. But again, you have to find your own comfort zone on that. So I'm just tossing it out there, and then you can decide what to do with that. Okay, Chris?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, got to run to break. I appreciate your call. I'm Greg Koukl here. Stay tuned for more on Stand to Reason.
Each of us as Christian ambassadors faces two daunting challenges when trying to make a difference for Christ. First, how do we initiate conversations about spiritual things in a way that doesn't seem awkward? Second, how do we keep ourselves from getting trapped or overwhelmed by others more aggressive than we are? Well, that's what Greg Koukl can teach you in his book and DVD curriculum on tactics. Greg will teach you how to maneuver in conversations so you can create more productive dialogue with skeptics and challengers. Tactics are practical skills that Greg gives names like Columbo, Suicide, Steamroller, Rhodes Scholar, and more. Tactics are a way of engaging others effectively and winsomely, no matter what the subject. If you're tired of finding yourself flat-footed and intimidated in conversations about what you believe, if you want to increase your confidence and your skill in discussions, no matter who you're talking to, then Tactics is for you. Order Tactics in book, DVD, CD, or MP3 format at STR's online store at str.org, or simply give us a call at 800-2-REASON. That's Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions.
Greg Koukl back at you here on Stand to Reason. Welcome to the School of Clear Thinking Christianity. And that school has been in session for 26 years now. Wow. All right, let's talk with Eric in Columbus, Georgia. Eric, welcome.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
Did I talk to you last week?
Yes, you did.
Oh, I'm not going to use that line that I did last week.
Yeah, no more fishing stories.
Okay, what's up?
Well, I just basically wanted to, I guess, get your take on it. I guess it's more of a tertiary issue.
Yeah.
My biological father is a Jehovah Witness,
Mm-hmm.
and occasionally, obviously, we have Saturday morning visitors, things like that. So I'm pretty familiar. That actually is what really propelled me into getting into apologetics. So I really learned what their, I guess, arguments were, and it really, I went to the next thing, and then the next thing, and the next thing. But long story short, I never have found, I haven't found anything to support their claim that Christ was not crucified on a cross.
Right.
They obviously look to the Greek word storos, and they translate it torture, stake. I've also had I've looked up things on YouTube. Another gentleman translates it just merely staff. Take up your staff and follow me. And so that being
What did they want to translate
part.
cross? So take up your torture stake and follow me. Is that what they want to translate it as?
That they literally the New World Translation literally translate that passage. Take up your torture stake and follow me. Yeah.
All right. Your torture. What is a torture stake?
Well, they claim that Christ was crucified in an upright position, hands overhead, one single nail through both hands, one nail through the feet, and basically hands overhead, so to speak. And obviously, I've rebutted while talking with my father, that Thomas asked to see the holes from the nails in his hands.
Hands and feet, right. Well,
right,
I guess they could say, they could say, well, if the nail goes through, if you stack the wrists and run the nail through the wrist, because that's where it went. It didn't go through the palms. It would go through the wrist. You could still have nails in the hands and feet. So even though, on their view, it seems that Thomas's comment would still work.
Well, they kind of stutter a little bit because nails are plural. The holes from the nails in your hands.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Right, and also Christ remarks to Peter that his hands will be stretched out, and he'll be led to places he doesn't want to go.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Right.
Right, and so I've done some digging, and I can other than that, but I wanted, I guess, more. I didn't know if you maybe had some secular sources.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, Eric. I'll tell you my response. I looked at the question, and here's what I thought to myself, and I'd say the same thing if a Jehovah's Witness were here. I'd say, so what?
Yeah, I normally say that.
So I don't see what the I just don't get it. I think there's. Look, the Jehovah's Witnesses are comfortable being the lone voice on a whole bunch of different issues.
Right.
That the scholars don't stack up with them, and they make a fuss about all kinds of little things, and that nobody else agrees with. Whether it's their Greek translation, nobody includes the New World Translation, which is their translation, in the list of bona fide acceptable translations in light of the scholarship, not in light of the doctrine, but in light of the scholarship. It just isn't there. So when they want to fuss about Jesus, okay, he was stretched, he was on a post, and all right, and therefore what follows from that of any significance?
Well, what happens is even Strong's translates it that way. But what they do is they use that to segue their translation. See, your Bible says cross, and it's not really. Here's the Greek interlinear, Strong's word, blah blah blah, and even they, but you guys still say cross. That's because our translation is better. And I guess this would be more for. I'm okay with it, but I know they're going to my neighbors. They may have visited some of your listeners.
Yes, but the thing is, I don't have so far any reason to deny the classical understanding of the translation of that word. Sometimes root words can be construed one way, but we know it was different because of all kinds of things from history. That this was the word stake. Let's just call it stake or tree, was the word used to describe that thing that we now call a cross.
Right.
I mean, I don't have any difficulty with that whatsoever. The real the question has to do with what historically actually took place and what is the evidence, whatever. However,
what evidence do we have for that historically? I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. I can't track that down.
Well, yeah, and I don't know what that is, and I'm not going to fuss about it because I don't care about it, and it doesn't make any difference. And even if they are right about the stake, that doesn't make them right about all of the corruptions that they have in their Greek translation. This is a mistake to think that. Oh, our translation is better because we have stake instead of cross. No, your translation is not better because you have that. Your assessment or translation of stake is better if it's right than the other translation of stake as cross.
Right.
That doesn't make the whole translation better.
Right, absolutely.
And
that usually is my response.
Yeah, well, good. And
That even if he did die on a stake as opposed to a cross, so what? He died for our sins. It's by grace alone.
Exactly. It's
Faith
irrelevant.
alone.
So good for you guys. You get, if you did, you get that word right. It doesn't matter. It does not matter. What matters is the person and the work of Christ, and they get that wrong all over. They distort the translation all over. They do with John 1:1 something they don't do with John, I think, 1:14 or 1:12, where the same construction appears.
Right.
And the word was a God. So guess you
Right.
got more than one God, don't you? They're the polytheists, not us.
Yep.
Because in their translation, the word was with God and the word was a God. He's with a God and he is a God. You got at least two gods. That's polytheism.
Right.
So, yeah, so I wouldn't spend a lot of time on this issue, but
I try not to. It's usually a hard left turn back to Christ's deity and how they just totally screw that up.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's the important thing, the person and the work of Christ. Okay, Eric.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg.
All right, buddy. Talk to you later.
Yes, sir.
Bye. All right. I think we jumped a break a little early. You think so? Yeah, let's just jump to break a little early. Then we will go catch Sergio and Bruce. If we get to him, probably will after this.
At Stand to Reason, we depend on the support of donors to carry on our mission to equip Christian ambassadors, and your non-cash donation items can help. You can transform your old cars, cell phones, or other items into ministry impact by donating them to Stand to Reason. Think of it. Because of your donation, Christians just like you will be able to effectively share their faith and change the lives of others forever. To make non-cash donations of all kinds to Stand to Reason, call iDonate at 877-897-4273 or go to idonate.com and visit STR's page. They'll take care of everything for you and Stand to Reason. Just call them at 877-897-4273 or visit idonate.com. Thank you very much for making Stand to Reason's work possible.
Greg Koukl here, standing to reason for classical Christianity, classical Christian values. Got a couple more calls here before the end of this hour. Let's get to them. Sergio in London, Canada. Glad you called. Hi.
Hello, Greg. How are you?
Okay. Doing well.
Okay. So this is a follow-up because we talked about this, the same subject about a month ago. So I keep on having conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses, and one of the things that the last time they brought me was an article talking about how the Trinity it sprouted in the midst of Greek philosophy, where they talked about triune gods and weird stuff. It will be a lot of work for me to actually go and research everything that it was saying.
Well, but, you don't need to though, Serge, because that argument is irrelevant. It's
irrelevant.
Was saying
it was a fallacy because it was saying since it sprouted in the midst of that philosophy, it doesn't follow that therefore Trinity comes from that worldview.
That's right. Regardless of what was
one of the things I wanted to ask you, I don't know if it's possible to find information. How far can we go back with the belief about the Trinity? Can we go back to, let's say, the fathers of the faith, maybe like the disciples of the disciples or something like that?
Yes.
Anything that it was written by them?
Yes. I want to be careful how I characterize the history of this, okay? Because even though there's Greek philosophy that is traded on to explain the Trinity, it was only used to try to have vocabulary to describe something that they discovered in the Scriptures. And so the characterization of the Trinity is something that developed over time, such that by the time you get to the 2nd century, towards the end of the 2nd century, I think Tertullian is the first one to use the term Trinity, you have this notion in a more robust form in play. The basic elements, though, go back to the New Testament, okay? And so they go back to the most primitive or earliest form of Christianity. And the earliest proclamation regarding Jesus by the church was that Jesus is Lord, okay? Jesus is Lord. Now, when they say Jesus is Lord, they didn't mean Jesus is sir, like yes, sir, like yes, kind of nobleman. They meant the Lord. This is what they had in mind. Now, they didn't work out the metaphysics. They didn't work out all the details. And in fact, it caught them by surprise. The Trinity came out of Jesus and the developing understanding of who Jesus was. They didn't think it up. They didn't invent it. They were confronted with Jesus of Nazareth, who said things and did things, and then the writings of the early apostles that identified Jesus of Nazareth with the God of the Old Testament. And so with that in mind, they have to figure out, well, what the heck is this all about? How does this work? How does it look? You have... and I'm just going from memory right now, but you have Irenaeus in the mid-2nd century that is writing in dealing with Gnostic heresy and calling Jesus God very, very clearly. So you have Irenaeus is a disciple of Polycarp, and Polycarp is a disciple of Jesus of the Apostle John. So you have Jesus, John, Polycarp, Irenaeus. Very early in the Christian testimony, you have this clear statement that Jesus is God in arguing against the Gnostic heretics of the time.
Can you point me to any source where I could read so I could study a little bit of that history?
Well, the only source I can point you to at this moment is the one from memory, and that's Irenaeus, but I can't tell you the exact chapter and verse. But if you go to, I know that Stand to Reason has a product called The Trinity, A Solution, Not a Problem. Now, I think you can get that in digital form, MP3, along with the notes that come with it. And in the notes are my bib sources, my footnote references that tell the sources for these things. So
okay.
And it's in Irenaeus. It's in the I can't even remember the title of the work by Irenaeus, but it's in there. You can also search, Google search online, and I bet you could find it. Irenaeus, Ireneus, and then search Deity of Christ. Just try that. Irenaeus plus Deity of Christ is what I would suggest. But I want to be careful in how I use the church fathers. I want to show that the church fathers are saying the same thing explicitly that the scriptures are saying both explicitly and implicitly, that Jesus is God. And they do this in a number of ways. John chapter 1 is a significant source. And verse 3, I think, is the most powerful reference, because in verse 3, the Jehovah's Witnesses can fuss around about verse 1, a God and all that nonsense. But when you get to verse 3, even in the New World Translation, it says, and all things came into being by him or through him. Doesn't matter how you translate dia, D-I-A, the article there.
But one of the things
let me just finish that. And apart from him, nothing came into being that has come into being. That means that the one called the Word is the uncreated creator. So you can't miss that.
Yeah, that is true. But let's say if we stand on their side, and because they say that Jesus, the guys that I've been talking to, they said that Jesus is still God, is just a lesser God. And they explained that the first creation it was Jesus, so it was God, and then
I know
created Jesus.
I know what they say.
That verse, let's say verse 3, if we stand for a minute on their view, that will still make sense in their head.
Well,
right?
It makes sense on their view in their head. It does not make sense in light of the verse itself. The verse itself is
I know. I've been trying to avoid the whole debate about their version and our version. I'm just trying to get together with them a few times.
Well, verse
so
3,
they could get to know me.
Okay, yeah.
But I'm trying to go other routes.
If verse 3 reads basically the same in both the New American Standard and the New World Translation. And here's what it says. Now, they can add all kinds of words between the lines that they want, but that isn't what the text says. Here's what it says. All things came into being through him. All things came into being through him. And if that's not clear enough, John says it the same way, the same thing a different way. And apart from him, that would be apart from his agency, not apart from excluding Jesus. It's apart from his agency. Nothing came into being that has come into being. If they want to say that apart from Jesus, that means Jesus isn't included, then the sentence doesn't make any sense. There's an article on our website called The Deity of Christ Case Closed. I think you can find it on our website. Yeah. And Melinda's tweeting it right now, and she's given the link. But there it lays all of that out for you, and they can deny it, but they can't get out of this problem in light of the grammar and the words that John uses. He makes it very clear. All right? Did I lose you, Serge? I think I lost Serge. Okay, it's okay because we got another caller coming up here. But Sergio, thank you for your call, and check out that article. All right.
Thank you very much.
Oh, there you are. Okay, you're welcome, Serge. Thanks. Let's catch Bruce in Iowa here. Bruce, you made it.
Hi, Greg.
Hey.
Oh, I'm tickled pink to talk to you.
Well, you are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed today, Bruce.
I'm excited. This is a big deal for me. I've met J. Warner Wallace, and that was a big thrill, but this is a big thrill, too.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Here's my situation. As JWW says, get in the game, and I've gotten in the game, and so I've been engaging with my brothers. I have two brothers. They're both atheists. And a young man, the son of a friend of mine, my buddy has 4 kids, and they were all raised Christian, and 2 of the 4 are not believers anymore. So this one of them is pretty amenable to sitting down and chatting, and I chatted with him probably a month ago, and then we met again. I'm sorry, a couple weeks ago, and then we met again this last Sunday. The first time we met, we chatted. I tried to make the case a little bit, but last Sunday we talked about abortion and same-sex marriage. 2 topics that we don't see eye to eye on, and interestingly, when I made the case that the unborn are fully human, which science really asserts without any doubt whatsoever.
Yeah, that's right.
He more or less conceded that. I said, well, why is this not human, or at what point would it become human? And he said, well, it's arbitrary.
Arbitrary?
And this kid is real sensitive to the rights of the LGBT community, and he feels that the American economic system oppresses poor people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what I'm trying to work out in my head is if this rights are, or when a person gets rights, at least the right to life, is arbitrary, under his own worldview, how can he assert that homosexuals should have the right to marry?
Right.
Because can't I just say under his own worldview that they arbitrarily are not people as far as I'm concerned, and therefore they don't deserve that right?
Well, that they have the rights that he thinks they have is simply an arbitrary assertion. Arbitrary means there's no reason, rhyme, reason, rationale. It just kind of there. I could pick this, I could pick that. I mean, my choice is arbitrary. And by the same token, if rights are arbitrary, that means there is no way to defend them, and they could have just been entirely different. We could make different choices. You're right. I think it does undermine his view.
It didn't make any sense to me at all. I thought, why would he even say that? because I don't think, it appears to me that he hasn't thought very deeply. He holds these opinions real passionately, but I don't think he's thought where they logically go if you actually hold it passionately. Strangely, my brother probably 6 weeks, 2 months ago, when my sister was back in town, we had a chat in the wee hours of the evening, and he said the same thing to me. He said, well, it's not human until it draws its first breath. I said, why then? Well, it's arbitrary.
That is arbitrary. That is arbitrary. Why don't we say that they're not human until they have heterosexual relationships? Heterosexual sexual relations. Why don't we say that?
Yeah. See, how could you even... How do smart people make really, really, really dumb arguments?
Duh, yeah, you've heard that one before, right, haven't you, from me?
This is what I'm not understanding is,
yeah.
Why would you even say that? And then Jake, when I pressed him, the young man that I talked to the other day, when I pressed him, he said, well, democracy sets a point. We live in a democracy, blah, blah, blah.
Well, we don't live in a democracy.
That's
sorry.
That's why I tried to tell him, no, we live in a representative republic, number one. And a democracy, Ben Franklin said, is two wolves and a lamb deciding what to have for lunch.
Yeah, right.
So that doesn't make sense either. But I'm not seeing if you adopt a worldview that we're not special created beings, an entirely secular worldview, from where are any rights derived?
I know. This is a huge problem. And even the appeal to democracy, that means, well, people vote, so we're going to go with common consensus. And then you say, well, the consensus is that gays are out, and your principled objection is what now? What? Well, that's not right. Well, wait a minute. What's right is consensus. The consensus is against you. In fact, if you argue that way, you're against the consensus, then you are wrong by definition. You're the one who's wrong because you're going against the majority.
Well, I tried in both cases to make the objective moral values argument, and neither my brothers which that shocked me because my brothers are near my age. I'm 54, so they're not like stupid kids, right? Mm-hmm. This other young man that I'm speaking with, he's 30 years old, so he's young enough to.
He's still being led around he's being led around by his emotions by others that make emotional appeal. This is another logical fallacy, by the way. Go ahead.
It just flabbergasted me that otherwise my brothers, I think, are sharp, but they seriously, they would not concede to me that moral values were objective, and I was so taken aback. I was stumped on how to follow up.
Okay, yeah, well then,
I had no idea.
Right. Look at, then say thank you. Every single time you complain about people not having a right to an abortion or people not having a right to get married or anything like that, thank you. I can always say now that morals are not objective, and then you will say you're right, they're not objective, and we'll talk about the Dodgers. Right. But see, they don't want to do this. You see, this is I'll tell you what's going on. People happen to be made in the image of God. That's the reality of it. So they can't get away from moral motions. It's built into them. They can't not talk as if morality is objective. But they're also desperately broken. And because they're broken and in rebellion, they want to defend their own point of view. They want what they want. And so they're going to use all kinds of language to sanitize their own view, rights language and things like that. Because it gets them what they want, and it is consistent with an accurate worldview that is there are rights in the world. They're just leveraging this moral claim in an illicit way for rights they don't genuinely have because they want them. And so then they're stuck, because if there are rights, then there are objective morals, and if there are objective morals, some things they're doing are wrong. But if there's no objective morals, which is the way they want to talk sometime, then they can't be wrong, but then they can't claim rights. And they don't. What they don't want to be is consistent. They want what they want. These are fallen human beings. They're arguing what they want. And my goal in that situation is to press the inconsistency and help them to see, look, you can't have it both ways. If you're going to be even-handed, if you're going to be smart, if you're going to be intellectually honest, then you got to play by the same rules. If they're if there is no objective morality, fine, okay, I'll go along with that for the moment for the sake of discussion. But you can't make rights claims then and say we ought to treat homosexuals a certain way, because that language is meaningless based on what you just told me. When you say we ought, what the heck does that mean? That we have to follow our evolution? Who cares what evolution we follow? I mean, where'd you get the idea that we got to obey our evolution, for goodness sake? But that's the only thing that's left for them.
This is kind of what I was thinking. I actually sent Jake an email saying, hey, I've thought about our conversation, and I want to make sure I understand your view clearly, because I don't want to be straw manning your opinion. And I repeated back to him that, number one, he said these were arbitrary, and I said, well, if they're arbitrary, why can't I arbitrarily deny homosexuals the rights you claim they have? And number two, he said they were, democracy, and I said, well, if rights can be voted on yes or no, then we can vote no, and they simply don't have that right. And then I pressed on his worldview, where do rights originate? If you deny what the Declaration of Independence says, that it's self-evident that we're endowed by our Creator, then where do they come from if you deny that?
Right.
So that's kind of the tack I took. But I'm meeting with him again every couple weeks. In a couple weeks, I'm seeing him again, and I wanted to give him some time so that he doesn't say, hey, you're distorting my view. I want to make sure I understand what he's saying.
It's very fair. What you've done is very even-handed, gracious to him. You're doing fine. I don't know how he could object based on what you just told me. Of course, that doesn't mean he won't, but...
Well, I just feel like he can't have thought that through, right?
Yeah.
I mean, surely if he sits down and thinks about this, because he's not dumb. I mean, he's college educated, which I guess doesn't mean he's not dumb, but he's not dumb. So if he
it means his thinking is often distorted.
Well, yeah,
look at people who have education sometimes can't see the obvious, and what you're offering is something obvious.
A line in Tactics that says sometimes the most educated people make the most elementary mistakes when it comes to spiritual things.
That's right, and you're running into that. So I think it's fair to hold his feet to the fire and see what he says. And you sound to me like you have a great attitude. You're being very careful with him. You're trying to reflect his view accurately back to him, see if that's it, and then you're raising a legitimate claim. Look at all rights claims are moral claims. That is, if you say somebody has a right, that means that they have a justified claim to something on their behalf, which means that if you don't give them what they've got coming to them, they don't get their propers, then you've done something wrong.
I didn't think about that. That is great, because it didn't dawn on me that, of course, anything, when you say that he says, well, homosexuals have the right to marry. Well, in order for them to have a right to marry, he can't assert that without conceding objective right.
That's correct.
Objective moral.
Objective morality,
And
and
I wasn't really thinking about that, but of course that's obvious.
Yeah, spell this out for him. What is a right? You can ask him. A right is a just claim to something. That means they have a claim to it that relates to something moral. They ought to have this claim. We ought to acknowledge that. It's morality written all over it. Good call, Bruce in Iowa. I appreciate talking to you. And that's it for this hour. Coming up next hour, stay with us, because Jonathan Morrow is going to be talking with me about his book on the book and problems that people have raised, 11 major challenges to the Bible's authority. And we'll cover that next hour here on Stand to Reason.